Hey, today we are going to ask ourselves about the relationship between video games and the emotion that they give to the player. In order to do so, we will take a look at several examples to highlight the different emotion provided by video game, the technique they use, and what kind of player will be affected by that kind of emotion. To write this video, I asked the question, which game make you feel the most emotion and why, to my closest friends who play a lot of video game. So, some examples that you may heard are reference to this little interview that I've done with my friends. Warning, this video contains a lot of spoilers, so if you don't want to be spoiled on any game that you like, if you see this little box with an exclamation mark, this means that I am about to spoil you, so don't hesitate to go to the timecode right below and don't be spoiled. Oh, and before we start, this is all the emotion that we will cover during this video. Now enjoy. Music allows us to transmit multiple emotions. It takes a very important place in a video game. Our first example is going to be Doom, a game developed by ID Software, but here what interests us is its composer, Mike Gordon, a composer rather attracted by metal music. And it just so happened that Doom managed to win the Best Music and Sound Design of the 2016 Game Award. Amazing, right? The OST of Doom are the quintessence of what a player could expect for such a violent game. It gives this desire to destroy everything. The only moment of pause in the music serves to catch one breath before going back to a secondary bloody assault. The music matches perfectly with the visual of the game, and it creates great adrenaline rushes for the player. The first emotion or sensation explored by this example is adrenaline. But we will come back to this in more detail later on. Another example is Ori and the Blind Forest and their wonderful soundtrack, highlighting the magical and floating side of the game with very hovering, sometimes even melancholic, notes. I have a friend who was very affected by the music of this game. It even took over the gameplay. Just like Doom, the music serves as the identity of the game. We could also talk about Dark Genesis boss's music. This example was recommended by a friend who was so struck and distracted by some song that she lost several times boss fights because of it. They were so engaging and so interesting to listen that the game itself was in the background. That's impressive. I can use the same reason for the OST of Dark Souls 3 developed by From Software. I was destabilized by the third part of the OST Gale the Slave Knight. This moment comes perfectly in time and creates an adrenaline rush and stick perfectly to the game until it becomes one. We move in rhythm with the music. As another example, I could have talked about the music in the Dancer of the Boreal Valley bosses, which is just perfect too. It's my favorite boss of the game personally, especially because of the frustration followed by the great satisfaction I felt when I managed to defeat it. The music is slow and melancholic. As the boss slowly walks toward you, the music is the identity of the boss. Moving on to the second point that gives emotion to the player. To introduce it, we will take the example of The Last of Us 2, developed by Naughty Dog. I wanted to talk to you about a mechanic that has been implemented only in this opus. This mechanic allowed the NPC to shout the name of their ally or friend when this one has been shot or killed, even by the player. This has the effect of reminding the player that he has just shot a living person. It may allow the player to be touched by his own action, to feel impact in the death of an NPC, because of the very human reaction his comrade has toward him. This has already sent shivers down the spine of many players, realizing what a barbaric act is to kill someone. In a game, everything is denaturalized and we don't really think about the consequences of our acts. And that's good, because it's a game. But some games, such as The Last of Us, bring us down to the earth and end up putting us face to face with the accomplished fact, and make us think about the sanitized brutality of video game as a whole. We can talk about another example about NPC humanization through time. It's a technique used in the world of the cinema, which has been transposed to video game, and that's called motion capture. A technique that was used in The Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk. This technique consists in transcribing the movement of an actor in the video game, whether it is his movement or even his facial expression. Motion capture helps us a lot to transmit emotion. The movement, as well as their expression, seems more and more human to us, and therefore help us to become more attached to a fictional character, because this one has some mimicry that seems really human to us. Now, moving on to the next part. Contemplation is a feeling often felt by players, sometimes described as a moment of fullness, well-being, or wonder, as we can be in front of a painting or any other type of art. To begin, I would like to tell you about the fabulous game named Journey, developed by That Game Company. I really love this company name, by the way, which is the first game I think of when we talk about contemplation. Many players have the same emotion of wonder and fulfillment when they discover Journey, the sets being the dominant part of the game, and that's why this game is so successful in my opinion. We can also quote Alice Madder's Return, developed by Spicy Horse, which is a game with a very disturbing aesthetic. All this oppression is partly created by the environment that surrounds us. It's imposing and take up the code of Tim Burton's film Alice in Wonderland. And the further you go in the game, the more the madness begins to fill the map, making them even more oppressive, as if the level were closing on the trapped player, and add to that very disturbing soundtrack. This example is the opposite of the first one, but show that the set of a game can have a strong impact for the emotion that will be transmitted to the player. To talk about an example in the same style, we also have Little Nightmare, developed by Tarsier Studio, with an oppressive atmosphere as well, especially due to the small size of the hero overhung by the gargantua decoration that surrounds him. Some games have the will to be immersive, to the point that you dive in a character, or that you be attached to a second character that follow you throughout the whole adventure. And the writer of this game tried to make us build a strong link between their character and us. For example, we can use The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, developed by CD Projekt Red. This game is more acts on the narration, and it's possible to bond with the main character as well as some of the secondary characters. It so happened that there are several possible endings to the game, but the one that caught my attention the most is the death of Geralt and Ciri. A very emotional event, the player being attached to this character since the very beginning of the game, have lived several or even hundreds of hours by their side. Their death can make the player feel strong emotion. For me, that was the case, not gonna lie. They inevitably leave memory of the game for a very long time, even if you don't necessarily come back to it anymore. We can also quote the first part of the prologue of Cyberpunk 2077, with the death of Jackie, a very enduring character that the player meets from the very beginning of the game. The death of this character is partly here to set the scene on the ruthless side of Night City. It's personally one of the deaths in the world of the video game that affect me the most. Despite everything you can say in Cyberpunk, I was really attached to this character, and I didn't expect his death. See you in the major leagues, Jack. it was a real shock. You can even use the word mooning for a virtual character. When the player asks himself like, I won't see him anymore, or I'm going to miss him, which was my case. And it was the case of a friend of mine too. I wasn't the only one to feel that. A player emotionally involved in the game is something that builds a strong bond between the two, and the player is likely to remember something that has made a lasting impression on him or her. With a more joyful note, we can talk about Life is Strange, developed by Square Enix, which staged a very interesting love relationship that take time to settle in, allow the player to feel like an actor in the relationship, and thus involved to the first degree in the private life of the character he plays. For this part, I'm going to use some quotes that I found on a very interesting article. So here we will talk about a feeling that we didn't evoke so far: rage. While playing, first of all, the player feels the emotion provoked by the game. Then he experiences it, which is proper to his character and personality. But in the end, he expresses another emotion on the platform, the one that is socially acceptable. Some game can be so frustrating for the player that he or she will get angry and feel rage throughout the game. Sometimes this feeling of rage is toward other players, in online game for example. And sometimes it is towards character created in the game to be hated. They may not be real, but the player involvement in his emotion is real. And so when it comes to social context as presented above, it is indeed normal for the player to modify his or her emotion, and that something socially acceptable will follow as not to denigrate the experience of other player. A game that can make the player feel complex emotion, desire, despair, and empathy. As explained earlier with examples such as Cyberpunk or Life is Strange, the player can be involved in complex emotion as mentioned above. This kind of involvement could be found in film or series for example, or in other forms of art. He can withdraw it on video game and relax or pull his hatred on it, as for example with the game Doom, which is somehow designed to be a huge outlet for those nerves. Or game with a deep narrative such as Cyberpunk, where the player can put his life aside and blend in with a totally different character, whom he has built either in his own image or in something he recognizes himself as. Someone who will live adrenaline pumping and action-packed adventure, and be able to take the player out of the monotony of his everyday life. To conclude, there is one important parameter to remember. The feeling of adrenaline is something that is constantly searched after by player. Some people don't have access to this sensation in life, or less, and they come to find it in video game. We can sometimes talk about addiction when this search becomes sickly and too repetitive, like we could be addicted to drugs that give us dopamine. However, our multiple examples have shown us that video games can contain multiple of complex emotion and not simply be limited to adrenaline, putting the video game back on the same pedestal as artworks such as the world of cinema or painting. Video game is a new way to convey emotion to a player because of the multitude of possibilities that it offers. Thank you for listening this little video, hope you enjoy and see you next time.